Welcome to Tech Photo Blog. This is episode number 55. This week I'm going to be discussing the shutter system inside of a DSLR camera or any other camera that uses a two-curtain shutter system like these cameras typically use. So now the point of this video is to try to answer three questions that are pretty common in email and sometimes on the forum. And first I'll go over those questions and sort of explain them to people, and then we'll take a look at the shutter and actually sort of talk through what the shutter is doing, and hopefully at that point everything will sort of click. But first let's go over the questions that I want to answer. The first one is, people will often use a flash with the camera axe for high-speed photographs, and they're like, okay, everything's working. Then they want to switch over to their shutter, and they're sort of wondering why with the camera axe you see an event with a sensor, and then you want to trigger the flash of the camera, and the flash works fine, but when they try to do it with the camera, the picture is taken too late and they sort of miss the event. And the short answer to why that happens is called shutter lag. So there's actually a pretty long delay between when the shutter actually is open from when you told it to open. So that's this lag that I'm talking about. You say open, and then the shutter opens. Whereas when you say, to a flash, take a flash, you go pick a flash, flash, instant. The shutter, there's a lag there. Typically it's anywhere from 70 milliseconds to over 100 milliseconds, and that can be quite a long time when you're trying to take these high-speed shots. And the reason for that is this is actually a physical shutter that's opening on these cameras, and it takes a while to actually open. There's also a long lag before it even starts to open, and that's partly due to the software and firmware and camera manufacturers not really trying to optimize for the lowest shutter speed. They're trying to make it feel responsive, but they're not really worried about high-speed photography. And then the other component is that it does physically take a long time to open these shutters. So no matter how optimized people make their cameras in the future, and that hasn't been the tendency, is I've actually seen more modern cameras are actually increasing that lag a little bit, which is unfortunate for high-speed photographers, but for the typical photographer, they don't really notice another 10 milliseconds or so of lag. So we'll see if it gets better in the future. But even if cameras do optimize to reduce the shutter lag, there's still this physical component, and that the physical component of slowly opening the shutter is never going to be as fast as a flash, which can be really nearly instantaneous. And then the second question that I'm answering is that a lot of people oftentimes want to use a really fast shutter speed. Maybe their shutter has a maximum speed of 1/8,000th of a second. Now the problem with that is that these shutter systems on modern cameras like DSLR cameras, typically if you want to open them all the way and then take your picture and then sort of close them, the way that works is, or the maximum speed for that is going to be your standard flash sync speed, which is often around 2/100ths of a second. And then if you go faster than that, then you enter the shutter speeds of high-speed sync, which will often go up to 1/8,000th of a second. So what's happening if the shutter's not opening all the way and then closing? And what's happening actually is that you've got your front curtain and your back curtain. What'll happen is, instead of opening and then closing, it'll go open, then start closing, and you'll have this little sliver of the image available. And if you have this really fast moving object like my head here, and you're kind of doing that, it kind of creates this diagonal effect across the image because it's moving so fast, and people will call this a jelloing effect. and basically all these things will be, the high-speed objects will be slanted through your screen with these high-speed shutters, because you're only exposing this slice. So that's kind of the problem with those shutter speeds that are faster than your standard flash sync speed, because then your shutter is only a little slivers open at 1/8,000th of a second. And this sort of leads into the last question, which is why can't I use a flash and a shutter speed that's around 1/8,000th of a second with the camera axe? And the reason for that is the camera axe, when it triggers a flash, it takes one little flash. So if you've only got a sliver of these two shutters open, you'll just end up with a sliver of the image exposed, and that'll just look completely wrong. So the way that a high-speed flash actually works from like Canon or something is that as it's moving, it's actually pulsing the flash many times, hundreds of times, sort of as the shutter goes through the system. And because of that pulsing, the image is equally exposed and everything looks fine for slower images. But again, if you did that for a high-speed image, you'd get that jelloing or diagonaling effect that I talked about earlier. So it really doesn't pay for a triggering device like the camera axe, which is trying to do high-speed video, or I'm sorry, high-speed photography, to try to pulse the flashes or come up with technology to do that, because it's not going to look right on really high-speed objects anyways. Those are sort of the three questions that I've hopefully answered at this point. And now we're going to show some actual video that I've created of a shutter opening and closing, and hopefully things will become more clear at this point. Here's the video I had promised. We'll start with sort of nothing happening. This is part of shutter lag though, because you'd push the button at this point, then the mirror flips up. But this is still part of shutter lag because the shutter is still closed. Finally, the first curtain goes down, and now the shutter is open. After a little while, the second curtain comes down, and now the shutter is closed and your exposure is done. But it still needs to flip the mirror back down, and at this point, the shutter and the exposure is completely done. So let's see that one more time in a little bit faster. So I didn't get a video of this one, but I will remind you that when your shutter speed goes faster than your standard sync, your standard flash sync, then instead of having one shutter come down and then the other shutter come down, what actually happens is one starts coming down and then the other one just sort of follows it, and you've only got that slice. And therein lies a lot of the problems with high-speed sync. Hopefully this has answered some people's questions out there, and thanks for watching.